Junko Furuta is the name of a Japanese schoolgirl whose fate is one of the most brutal I have ever researched for a video. This video is about her kidnapping and the 44 days of pure torture that followed. The crime surrounding Junko Furuta is one of the worst cases of torture in Japanese history, and I must issue a warning in advance. This video is not for the faint of heart. If you are not comfortable with this subject matter, please do not watch this video. Junko Furuta was born on January 18, 1971, in Misato, a small town in Saitama Prefecture, Japan. She grew up with her brothers and parents. Later, Junko attended Yashio Minami High School in Misato. She was a very hard-working and kind student. Although Junko was somewhat shy and reserved, she had a few friends who appreciated her loving nature. Junko also worked part-time after school to help her family achieve a slightly higher standard of living. After graduating from high school, she wanted to start working at an electronics retailer, where she had already received a firm job offer. Junko seemed to be leading a happy life and had plans for the future. Unfortunately, things turned out very differently. The year is 1988. Junko is now 17 years old and very popular and sought after at school. But the rather shy Junko found it all a bit too much. She stayed completely out of the city's party scene and didn't want to meet any boys. Her classmate Hiroshi Miyano was particularly disappointed, as he had his eye on her. In the fall of 1988, he asked her out on a date, but Junko politely declined. She didn't particularly like Hiroshi because he was unfriendly and considered violent. She didn't want to go out with someone like that. Hiroshi couldn't believe that someone would reject him, especially Junko. He wasn't used to it. No one had ever dared to say no to him because everyone knew he had connections to Japan's criminal Yakuza scene and feared him. Furious, he hatched a plan to take revenge on Junko, but at first, no opportunity presented itself. That changed on November 25, 1988. At around 8:30 p.m., Hiroshi was out with his friend Nobuharu Minato. The two had broken the law many times in the past and were stealing from several women that day. They happened to run into Junko, who was on her way home from her part-time job. Junko, who was riding her bike, did not notice the two at first. Hiroshi ordered Nobuharu to kick Junko off her bike. He obeyed his boss. Nobuharu then fled the scene and Hiroshi rushed to Junko's aid, pretending to be her savior. He helped her up and pretended he had just happened to be there. To be on the safe side, he insisted on accompanying Junko home. The 17-year-old was grateful and had no idea what her classmate had planned. Hiroshi led her to a nearby warehouse, overpowered her, and locked her in. This was followed by 44 days in captivity that can only be described as pure hell. The following scenes are described in detail and should be avoided if you are easily offended. And even if you're not, this is truly the most brutal case I have ever read about. I had to take several breaks because I couldn't believe what they did to Junko, and I didn't want to believe it. Please consider this a trigger warning regarding rape and violence. I am reporting on this case anyway because I feel so sorry for Junko and I don't want her to ever be forgotten. On the first day, Hiroshi repeatedly beat Junko, raped her, and threatened to kill her if she tried to escape. He then took her to a nearby hotel and called his friends Nobuharu Minato, Yugura, and Yasushi Watanabe. During the phone call, he talked about the kidnapping and rape. The three friends, who also had connections to the Yakuza, asked him not to release Junko yet so that other men could abuse her. Hiroshi continued to threaten Junko, saying that if she didn't play along or fight back, he would send friends from the Yakuza to her home and have her family murdered. Junko was so intimidated and scared that she obeyed. Hiroshi took her to a park where he met up with his 3 friends. Together, they went to a house in the Ayase district of Adachi. The house belonged to Nobuharu's parents. From then on, this house was where Junko was held captive and tortured. It was November 27th when Junko's parents reported their daughter missing to the police. When Hiroshi found out, he forced Junko to call her parents and tell them that she had run away and would be staying with a friend from now on. She had to ask her parents to drop all police investigations. Later that day, Nobuharu's parents came to the house where Junko was being held. The boys forced Junko to pretend to be the girlfriend of one of their friends. At first, Nobuharu's parents believed the lie. A few days later, however, they saw through the deception. But because they were so afraid of the Yakuza, they did not report it to the police either. From then on, the boys did not bother with any pretenses because they knew they had nothing to fear. Nobuharu's brother also found out about the kidnapping, but he was too afraid to do anything about it. After a week in captivity, Junko had already been raped over 100 times by the 4 boys and other gang members. By this point, she was no longer allowed to wear any clothes. The 4 main perpetrators beat her and starved her. At night, she had to sleep on the balcony in sub-zero temperatures, and during the day, they locked her in a freezer for hours. Junko's strength waned with each passing day. On day 9, there was hope for the first time. Junko managed to run to the phone and dial the police number. But before she could say anything, she was overpowered by Hiroshi. When the police called back, he dismissed them, claiming that he had dialed the wrong number. The boys punished her for her behavior by pouring a flammable liquid over her legs and setting them on fire with a candle. The severe injuries caused Junko to have a seizure. After more than 2 weeks in captivity, Junko was severely dehydrated. She was only allowed to drink her own urine, and the boys forced her to eat cockroaches. The cruelty of the teenager's actions increased dramatically, and they did truly unspeakable things to her, which I do not wish to describe here. Junko repeatedly begged to be killed. She could no longer endure the cruel torture. But of course, the boys did not grant her request. By now, Junko Furuta was severely disfigured. As a result, the men lost interest in her sexually. On that day, the 4 kidnapped another 19-year-old girl and raped her. The boys forced Junko to play a game of mahjong with them. Despite her physical condition, Junko managed to win. This made the 4 boys angry. They beat her with metal dumbbells. They poured flammable liquid over Junko again. The entire attack lasted over 2 hours. Junko died of her severe injuries in the days that followed. Since the boys did not want to be convicted of murder, they packed Junko's body into a travel bag and then placed the bag in a large rolling barrel. They filled the barrel with wet concrete and disposed of it the next day in a remote rural area. On January 23, 1989, Hiroshi Miyano and Yo Ogura were arrested for the rape of the 19-year-old. At that time, the investigators knew nothing about Junko. On March 29, 1989, the 2 were interrogated again. 9 days before Junko's abduction, a young woman and her 7-year-old son had been murdered nearby. This case remains unsolved to this day. However, Hiroshi misunderstood the questioning and thought it was about Junko. Assuming that Yo Ogura had confessed, he revealed the location of Junko's body. The initially confused police followed up on this and found the barrel containing Junko's body at the location described. Her body was so disfigured that it could only be identified by her fingerprints. A subsequent autopsy revealed that Junko had become pregnant. The other 2 young men were arrested. When Junko's mother was told what had happened to her daughter, she collapsed and had to be taken to a psychiatric ward. Hiroshi and Yo were 18 years old at the time of the crime. Yasushi was 17 and Nobuharu was 16. They all changed their names after the crime became known. The judges had promised them anonymity, but the magazine Shukan Bunshun published their full names anyway. By reconstructing the torture, investigators were able to determine that Junko had been abused well over 400 times by more than 100 different men, some of whom could be traced, others not. Since most of the men were still minors, the sentences were mostly very lenient. They also learned that on the 16th day of the kidnapping, a young man named Koichi Ihara was forced to abuse Junko. Koichi told his brother about Junko, who then told his parents. The police were alerted and even drove to the Minato family's house. The boys opened the door and denied that Junko was with them. They even asked the police officers to come inside, but they refused, as the boys were so polite and would surely not invite them in if they had something to hide. The officers were later dismissed and had to change their place of residence because they received so much hatred from the population for their behavior. In July 1990, the court verdict was handed down. Hiroshi was sentenced to 20 years in prison, Yogura to 8 years, and Yasushi and Nobuharu to 6 and 8 years, respectively. Their sentences were also particularly lenient due to their age. The population felt that the punishment was too lenient and confronted the boys' families with such hatred that they were forced to move away. Hiroshi's mother did not blame her son. She blamed Junko for her son being in prison and desecrated the schoolgirl's grave. But the boys did not seem to have learned from their punishment either. After their release from prison, most of them reoffended. A young girl was brutally tortured for 44 days, and there were even several people who knew about it but did nothing to protect her or save her life. It is impossible to imagine how cruel those 6 weeks must have been for Junko. This crime leaves one truly shocked and speechless. Nevertheless, I hope you watch the video because, as I said, I decided to cover this case because I don't want Junko Furuta's name to ever be forgotten. If you would like to support me, please leave a like and comment on the video. It is unlikely that the video will be monetized, so this support is all the more important to me. Thank you in advance, and thank you for watching. Good night, and see you soon.